Hi, everybody, and welcome. Today, we're going to be going over a few different things. We're going to be going over what's recently been happening here in Minnesota, including the recent developments at the House. So, for those of you guys outside of Minnesota that do not know, our House of Representatives is split 50-50, 67-67, except for one of the DFL people that they ran. And up here, that's the Dems, the Democrats. So one of the people that they ran did not live in their district, and they knew it. So now they're stuck at a 67-66. So they haven't been showing up to work. They just refused to come in. And the GOP guys had gone in and had been doing the work, and they were getting protested. So that's interesting because the protesters that came in, they were in there with bullhorns. We'll play a little bit of the video here shortly, but they were yelling in the representatives' faces. So I went ahead and dug some more because I know that there's a history with Minnesota and communism and socialism. So I went ahead and dug and tried to figure out, okay, who are these groups and what are they doing? Because one of the representatives, Walter Hudson, sort of posted about some of those people having been at hearings, giving testimony on behalf of certain organizations. So I went ahead and did some digging into that, and come to find out it probably is linked back to certain other organizations. But the history up here gets real interesting because in the early 1900s, Minnesota was like headquarters for the Communist Party of the United States, between here and Milwaukee and North Dakota. And we had actually sent people from Minnesota over to be trained at the Lenin Institute or whatever over in Moscow. There's a couple of them that ended up having to flee the U.S. Because of their activities. And one of them is a name that is very familiar as well. And he lost his department chair for physics. And that's a guy by the name of Robert Oppenheimer, I think. Whatever, the bomb guy Oppenheimer. And I'll get to that here shortly. But I'm just going to go over the history of it because the problem is where we're at in society nowadays is that we have the left and wing that's become so normalized, and to the point where people are going to start to push back because these policies are affecting people, and they're actually having a negative impact on the communities that are being served. So to start off, I'm going to play a real quick video, and that is a video of one of the socialists from Minnesota. And that way you guys get a little bit of a feel of some of the things that Minnesota's influenced when it comes to just your daily life, when it comes to the socialism and that. So this is a video by PBS. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up right now. It's just a few minutes long.
With the free PBS app.
You may not know his name, but you definitely know his creation. Victor Gruen designed the first modern indoor mall.
Victor Gruen considered this a utopian experiment.
That's because the architect of Southdale Center was a socialist, and this was his new vision for suburbia.
He wanted to get people out of their cars. He was worried that everyone would go from their private house, their private car, to their private office and back, and never get to know their neighbors, never have any interaction. So that was the idea of the mall.
The vibrant community Victor Gruen created in this Minnesota mall was inspired by the bustling street life of Vienna, Austria, where he grew up. He had studied architecture at the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, the same school that had rejected an aspiring artist named Adolf Hitler 10 years earlier. When Hitler's interests turned more sinister, Victor Gruen, who was Jewish, fled to America.
Concept fitting to a particular situation.
Gruen soon made a name for himself in New York, designing spectacular storefronts across the city. But he recognized the retail action in post-war America was shifting to the suburbs, and he didn't like what he saw. Victor Gruen was dismayed by the unsightly commercial strips sprawling for miles on end, what he called the greatest collection of vulgarity ever collected by mankind.
So he thought if we don't intervene, we're just going to have large tracts of development with no center.
Gruen got his chance to remake suburbia in 1952 when the Dayton Company hired him to design an indoor shopping mall in a Minneapolis suburb. While a small neighborhood mall had been enclosed before, Southdale is where Victor Gruen introduced the formula for the regional indoor shopping mall, a formula that has Gruen's idealistic vision written all over it.
Look at this big blank wall here. What's the purpose of that?
Well, Victor Gruen called this the introverted type, and what he really wanted to do was to take the typical suburban shopping center, which faced out to the street, and flip that.
This way, Gruen could take all that sprawling commercial clutter he hated and hide it in a central facility with a plain exterior,
so that the stores faced inward into an air-conditioned space.
Inside, it was a shopper's paradise, 72 stores under one roof. But this wasn't just a place to buy things. At its center was the Garden Court of Perpetual Spring, which featured a goldfish pond and an aviary, sculptures and a sidewalk cafe. There was even a small zoo in the basement. At Southdale, suburbanites could get out of their cars and enjoy all the benefits of a downtown without all the traffic and dirt.
So he really envisioned malls as community centers rather than as places that you simply go to shop.
This urban-like setting was also good for business. The experience was so dazzling and fun, customers stayed longer and shopped more. The windows were placed high above so shoppers wouldn't be distracted by what was going on in the outside world.
A little bit like a casino. They didn't want people to actually look outside.
The socialist architect had created a capitalist cash cow. On the day Southdale opened, 75,000 curiosity seekers came out to see what Life magazine dubbed the splashiest shopping center in the U.S. Though it did have at least one detractor, Frank Lloyd Wright came for a tour and said the Garden Court had all the evils of the village street and none of its charm. You've tried to bring downtown out here. You should have left downtown, downtown. Over time, Victor Gruen himself grew disillusioned with his grand experiment. You see, he had envisioned the shopping center as just one piece of a larger planned community, which was supposed to include houses, apartments, offices, and schools. Gruen hoped this would be a compact and well-ordered alternative to sprawl and blight.
Now that all didn't come to pass. And so in many ways, the most important part of Gruen's vision hasn't been realized.
Instead, Southdale became an isolated island of retail in a sea of parking. And this is what large swaths of suburban America came to look like, as Southdale was imitated far and wide. Gruen called these copycat malls bastard developments. They lacked his larger social vision and instead attracted more of the sprawl he had tried so desperately to fight.
And I think that that's the kind of the tragedy of it. We didn't understand the depth and breadth of his vision.
GoDaddy Arrow can get my business on.
Okay, we're back. So that's just one small example of how it's affected us. Okay, now that's not a bad one. And a lot of the things that have happened with it seem good. Okay, But the thing of it is, you have to look back at the Leninist schools and what they were actually teaching. So the socialists in Minnesota, most of them, and the communists, the goal originally was to literally destroy uh, capitalism, right? And to destroy, I guess, our current way of life and implement communism and socialism. So they sent people over to uh, Russia to study, and that guy's name was Gus Hall. I'm going to see if I can pull that up here. And he has another buddy named Harlan Cleveland. So Gus Hall. I'm going to go ahead and share this screen just so. I'm sorry, I'm having problems sharing it again. So I'll just read it to you, I guess, real quickly here, since I'm not able to get that screen share to work. Okay, so Gus Hall was born in 1910, and he was a American activist who served as the general secretary of the Communist Party of the USA from 1959 to 2000. He's also known closely associated with the Little Steel Strike, and he was indicted under the Smith Act. But his background is he was born up in northern Minnesota, and he's part of the Finnish group. Now, the Finnish were communists when they came over here. Most of the socialism and communism in Minnesota started up on the Iron Range. But you have to realize that not everything that they did was bad. There was bad working conditions in the mines and things like that. And so they did organize as well to help protect workers' rights in that, because that's sort of a big thing if you're like dying in the mines and stuff, right? Like you want to make sure that people aren't dying when they go to work. It'd be sort of cool. But anyway, they were involved with the industrial workers of the world, and they were early members of the Communist Party of the USA in 1919. He then moved to Minneapolis. His father was part too, and he became part of the Young Communist League. In 1931, he went to Minneapolis after this. In 1931, he had an apprenticeship to travel to the Soviet Union, and actually studied for 2 years the International Lenin School in Moscow. And I'll pull that up here in a minute. Okay. But after his studies, Hall moved to Minneapolis to further the YCL activities. While there, he operated in the hunger marches, the demonstrations, behalf of farmers and others during the Great Depression. And he was jailed for 6 months for the part in the Minneapolis Teamsters strike. That was a pretty bad one up here. People got hurt on both sides. And that was led by Farrell Hobbs. So he was blacklisted up here. So he went to Ohio. And he wanted to organize in the steel industry. So that's sort of what he did. There's a couple other ones here. And one of them is particularly interesting, and that's that Oppenheimer feller I talked about. Sorry, give me 1 second here. So yeah, he was led the physics department at the U of M, and due to his involvement, is it Frank Oppenheimer? Yeah, sorry, I was wrong. It's not Robert. It's Frank Oppenheimer. The guy who was a particle physicist. Um, so during testimony, he admitted that him and his wife had been members of the Communist Party for several years, and they made him resign at the University of Minnesota. And the University of Minnesota actually had a list that they put out because they were worried about the communist and socialist influences in Minnesota. And that wasn't, it was brought up as like a scare type thing. But we actually had a group called the Go for Communists on campus there. And they also had the other side too, right? In the 30s, I believe it was, they actually had a KKK float in the parade as well for homecoming. So they allow expression on both sides, as egregious as it, because you have extremes on both sides, right? We're in the middle. It is just ended up getting into public service and education. So Hubert Humphrey was actually involved with them for a bit. And if you look up his FBI files, it gets real interesting. Because on his FBI files, he was associated with some of these folks. And they merged into the Democratic Party to make the Democratic Farmer Laborer Party. Some of them got kicked out when they did the clamp down during the Red Scare and that. But not all of them did. Anyway, Humphrey continued on with them, and the public planning school up here now it bears his name. That's the Hubert Humphrey School for Public Affairs. Some of their previous leaders get real interesting. So Harlan Cleveland, I believe, was associated with them. Just double check here real quick. Yeah, he was a dean of the Hubert Humphrey Institute for Public Affairs. But he's a real interesting fellow. Because he was big in pushing online education. And he also served as the Assistant Secretary for International Organization Affairs under Kennedy and Johnson. And then he went on. Now, mind you, Johnson helped create up the east-west portion of Honolulu College for the University of Hawaii, which was a known CIA front. Okay, Cleveland then went on to serve as a president of the University of Hawaii from 1969 to 1974. Period that saw their astronomy project and all that jazz. Okay. Then he was involved in some international peace stuff as well. I have more on Harlan as well. And this is from the JFK archives. Okay. And this is key, okay? He was a member of the board of economic welfare. He served in the government service at the beginning at the Farm Security Administration in 1940, following an internship at the National Institute for Public Affairs. He was the executive director of economics at the Allied Control Commission in Rome. So he oversaw from 1944 to 1945. And then he was a vice president of the Allied Control Commission right after. So he helped the UN establish the Rehabilitation Administration in Italy. He also oversaw a lot of the stuff there in Europe that was going on. Okay, the formation of NATO. You have the stuff over that he did, then going from there to how China was going to be post World War II as well. Okay, in 1947, he became the director of the China program. And in 1948, he transferred to the U.S. Economic Cooperation Administration as a director in China. And that was shut down after the 1949 takeover. And he helped them go to Taiwan in that. He continued to work for the Economic Cooperation Administration, and became the Far East Division Program head. Then he went on to 51 to 53. He was in charge of the European program at the Mutual Security Agency. So he helped basically set up everything that was happening after World War II. And then he went on to do, in 1961, the second assistant secretary to stuff that I said before for the international organization by JFK. He also served under Johnson as well. And so he helped work with the food programs and that. Now, Orville Freeman under JFK, Orville Freeman was under Kennedy. And not Kennedy, LBJ. I believe he did get in under Kennedy. I can look that up real quick. Anyway, Orville Freeman, he ended up doing a lot of aid to Russia and opening up those doors. Now, I had conversations with people before that what happened in Russia is that the mob ended up taking over too, and they still run things today. Okay, one of them is associated with Joseph Bodansky, that international terrorism little thing that they had going on, the conference, and Putin's rabbi, all that jazz. So Orville Freeman used the food programs to help run, but there was also mob influence as well with the grains and that. So that's the type of people that this guy worked with. Okay. And that was Harlan Cleveland there. Give me 1 second here. I'll pull up Orville's stuff. Yep, under JFK and under LBJ. So Orville Freeman was in charge of the USDA or Department of Agriculture during the whole Billy Sol Estes scandal and stuff like that. So that's sort of what was going on with everything there. And so anyway, I'm just saying these guys have big pull all around the world. They help institute NATO. They help institute the UN stuff, all these food programs, but they have socialist ties. Okay, they have commie ties. And not like, commie, but yeah, commie. One of Minnesota's other famous commies is Erwin Marquette. And he was a big guy up here. He was also in the physics department. He talked about how to put commie stuff into biology and physics and all that jazz. And he was in 74. He was actually the commie party. They had the commie party up here. Okay, candidate for governor. So The problem that you have, though, is the commies have gone so far to the left here in Minnesota. Oh, I guess they are. We always have been, right? They just have gotten more powerful that they think that they get to run roughshod over everybody. The problem with communism is that you can never give people enough stuff to make them happy. So there's more stuff given to them. Okay, you have to take that stuff from somebody else to give it to them. Sort of how that works, right? But if there's not enough people producing stuff, then there's not enough stuff for everybody. So the other problem with that is you're going to see the rise of the extreme right. And when I say that, it's going to be a natural occurrence because you have the left, right? And it's like a pendulum. You're going to have an equal and opposite reaction. So you're going to have the right. And that's literally what's going to happen. That's what's been happening. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up that video from Walter real quick. So I'm going to shut off my camera and see if I can't find that. Okay, I found it. I'm going to see if I can get this to screen, and if not, we'll get it figured out. Oh, Chaz is here. Sorry, I was waiting on to see if Chaz was going to be able to come on. Let's see if I can pull him up real quick. Give me 1 second. I'm new to this. Figure out which screens are what. Okay, 1 second here. I'm going to mute myself for just 1 second and see if I can pull Chaz up.
There we go. There we go. Good morning. I shouldn't say good morning, but good evening. Good evening. Good evening.
Sorry, I'm not sure how much of that you heard. There we go. Why don't you go ahead and introduce who you are a little bit?
My name is Chaz Neal, aka the Urban Conservative. I've been doing this for ever since May 25th, 2020. And you know, when I started, I jumped behind BLM, FBA, and I felt like that was the right thing to do because my morals and integrity was that what happened was wrong. But I see along the way is that people started to their morals and integrity had a price, but not also that there was also history. And I seen as like, how can you be fighting something like homelessness or violence prevention, violence interrupters, and yet our streets were getting worse, not better, but worse. And it made me realize like, yo, we got to do something, because if our politicians, they want to talk about unity and power grabs and all of this, man, they've had a power grab in our community for years. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, there's people in the community that talk, but they're not heard because of the simple fact you have gatekeepers like nonprofit CEOs and it just made me change it made me think differently of what I wanted to do and what I wanted to achieve. So I will say that. And it's made me look at individuals very differently as well, because I can see is that their words say they love change, they love reform, but they just love the money that it brings, that those key words bring, because that's the one thing that I've realized along the way too, is that nobody is ever going to be totally transparent. You have to make them be transparent, but you got to understand of how to make them be transparent, because everything isn't all unicorns and butterflies. This shit is, there's some evil ass shit in this. And one thing that I'm coming to find out is that, growing up is I was in the streets. I was doing wrong. I was sinning. But I can see these politicians, they say they speak holy, but their actions, man, it's wild of, like, one thing is that, and I know we talked about this before too, about Jewel, being artificial intelligence and,
Some people
things
don't
like
know
that.
what Jewel is. So Jewel Eldora is was a handle or whatever on Twitter,
On Twitter.
and we thought it was real for a bit. But go ahead.
Well, that was the crazy part, you know what I'm saying? Of, like, I thought, Jewel was a real woman, and it's crazy because there's been independent media that has quoted Jewel. You know what I'm saying? Like, one of that, I feel like, Nico and Unicorn Riot, and especially when it came down to Target, because they are in the news, you know what I'm saying? People are talking about their DEI initiatives and, things like that. But it made me realize that if people don't do their homework, because I would have known that Jewel wasn't real unless, I guess, the signs were there. I just didn't, my mind wasn't open to it.
I
I'll be
wouldn't have
honest.
known because, like, she hooked us up with some really good connections. Okay.
Right.
And, like, if people don't know who the Attorney General of Minnesota is, Mr. Keith Ellison, he was involved with this really interesting group back in the 90s called was it Anti-Racist Action, right? And then that's where he got his little Antifa, I think, handbook that he's posed with. But he represented one of their guys too, by the name of Kirian Knudsen, and his mom was real big into the Communist Party up here. Okay, like in the 80s and that, like, huge. So it gets interesting where all these connections end up happening. I'll let you continue though.
Well, and that was the crazy part, is like, before, because this is like the crazy part for me, is everybody's talking about, well, I need to see it. I need to see it in person. You know what I'm saying? And, like, now I realize of, like, but Jewel gave me the sources. You know what I'm saying? Even if they were archived, Jewel told me where to go look for it. And I got to understand Jewel more is because it was programmed after Ron Edwards. And a lot of people don't bring up Ron. And what's crazy is that I comment all the time on Facebook to a certain individual, Don Allen. Everybody knows Don Allen, and I say names around this piece. So I'm not very shy, not very probably political correctness. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah,
But
I call out people by name too. That's what I'm
right.
literally in the process of doing. Is like, here's how we got here, man.
Well, yeah, and the thing of it is not calling a person out. You know what I'm saying? Because I will say this: there's individuals that I work with in the community, and I know that they work with people that are dirty. You know what I'm saying? So it's like the work that you're doing, it may be good, but if you're not doing it with the right people, that doesn't mean that it's good. Because I've seen a lot of things in the last couple of years, especially at the state capitol. You have Al Flowers, Senior and Junior, Lisa Clemens, Jerry McAfee, Sharif Willis, and other individuals. You see them all in the news media. UCMT, 21 Days of Peace.
And one second here, for those that don't know, those are community leaders from North Minneapolis that run organizations that supposedly help the community. Some of those organizations have been around since, I don't know, the 90s. Supposedly
Right.
these people came from the City Inc. and that, which goes back to the 70s and 80s of doing the community violence interrupting, and they did the
Yep.
same type of things going on in the 80s, which we've shown on Jazz's show before.
Numerous times.
There's news clippings that literally are going over the exact same problems that we're seeing today, but these people have supposedly been helping and getting money to do
Right.
so.
And that's what I never understood is because, you know, it's like I was in these streets, I was, what I'm saying, I was a youngin. Because that's the one crazy part is I can tell a lot of people that are in positions of power in these nonprofits are part of the problem. And I'm gonna explain why I say they're a part of the problem. Is they don't know the connections. Or maybe they do. They do know the connections and want to be naive, but it's crazy of how when I was a youngin, gang banging and doing all that, you know, two of the people that say they speak for the black community were my targets. And then I hit with a young girl at a park, and almost got life, and shouldn't say almost life, but almost became an adult, and stayed in a state penitentiary. But what ended up happening is that we ended up taking, I guess, made a deal, whatever you want to call it, and my mom had to sign these papers. And in the process of her signing these papers, I became a ward of the state. So she literally signed over. She didn't know this, what I'm saying, until a couple years later when she was trying to get me back, is that she had signed over her rights as my parent. So I was a ward of the state at the age of 12, all the way up until uh, I went back home, and we went to Rochester, and we moved to Rochester, and I was 17. So there was like so many. What people don't understand is that there's individuals in our community that could have done something. There's enough stories out here that go back on years. You know what I'm saying? Because what's crazy to me is that, people don't ever want to bring up the City High incidents over South, or Murderapolis days, or the Honeybee, or Pillsbury House. They don't want to bring up I'm not saying that we shouldn't, because my thing of it is I'm not saying that we should, but if you don't know the history, and then once you do know the history, you can understand and see why this North Minneapolis and Minneapolis is the way that it is. Because I honestly believe
Yeah,
that it's designed and that way. And
that's exactly what I'm trying to get at with what I'm showing. Because like the Hubert Humphrey School for Public Affairs, they
right,
ended up in the 70s. Okay, so right when it got started as the Hubert Humphrey stuff, that's when they started the Horizons Project, which I don't think we're going to get to fully today. I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of that. But what that was the Horizons Project literally was in advising our legislator
right,
on what they needed to focus on for urban planning, for social welfare, for they basically set the legislative agenda for the past 50 years, and it was seated by communists.
right,
So if in 50 years things haven't gotten any better from 68 when the riots happened, because I mean maybe certain places have gotten a little bit better, but I mean overall the same problems seem to be where the disparities and whatever, nothing's really changed there. But we've had created up all these feel good programs to try to address the issue when all that happens is money laundering in between, because we're not actually fixing the problem, which most people do not have a problem
right.
trying to fix the problem and saying, yes, there is a problem. It's how do we get from here to there?
But when you start doing it fraudulently, and what I mean by that is, we see all these things like feeding our future. And especially with like COVID. COVID came here and it opened the doors for a lot of things, and especially frauds and scams. And one thing is that I was watching a hearing, I think it was Wednesday, or maybe it might have been Thursday.
Can you pause
Jody
that thought for one
DHS was
second?
speaking.
Can you pause that thought for 1 second? I just want to say that it wasn't just COVID, because a lot of those groups that became nonprofits during COVID had been around, some of them for quote unquote 25 years, as we saw with the CUABP in the hearing in the House. They were getting money and stuff, I guess, for services that they were providing to the U and classes and stuff like that, but they weren't an organization for 20 of the 25 years or whatever they've been in existence. So I mean, I'm just saying it has been going on with some of these groups a lot longer than just since COVID. But go ahead.
Right. What I mean by like since COVID is that these groups were only seeing maybe 30. They were being able, their 990 forms were not very much. You know what I'm saying? They were only having to do postcards instead of having to do where a more itemized list of
cap on that is somewhere right around $50,000 to $60,000.
Right. And that's what I
year.
mean of like they were literally doing things that it should have been. Yeah, it was crazy in my eyes, at least. It was crazy to me.
Definitely, and it got a lot bigger.
Right.
And so that's like how communism wraps some good ideas in this really nice packaging, but at the core of it, they want to actually destroy the societies that they're messing with to try to have their utopia at the end and rebuild. And so they do things like human rights or social justice or racial equality or whatever, when the goal is not equality, as we've seen here recently with the Department of Education, a couple of the other ones. When you have Educate Minnesota coming out with abolishing whiteness as one of their seminars for the Minnesota educational break that they get taught, that's not asking for equality. Now you're asking to abolish somebody, which I wouldn't want to abolish you. So I don't appreciate you trying to abolish me. You know what I mean?
Right.
And like the education stuff that they ran through over the past few years, if you watch the House committee hearings, well, I guess unquorumed House committee meetings now, they were talking to administrators from schools that were saying, in our local school districts, we're going to have to levy millions and millions of dollars just to cover the unemployment for the summer for the teachers, where they're getting paid year round, where the extra time off, because also now the substitutes are able to earn extra time off. The problem is some of these subs are calling in the same day they pick up a shift to get their time off. And so you're having to have subs for the subs. And it's not even about kids. It's about, and I'm sorry, but teachers know that they work basically 9 months out of the year. They get the summer off, which they well deserve. But to expect to be paid for 12 months of work and then all these other added benefits and whatever else you're stacking on that. And there's a lot of administrative overhead with some of these organizations as well in the education side. So but you're having all this money up here dealing with this when none of it's getting down really to the kids. And we're not actually changing anything there. And the second side of it is, at least since 2007, and I have the documents from when one Horizons switched over to One Minnesota in the early 2000s. It's not a Walls program. One Minnesota's been around a bit. That's from the public affairs from Humphrey School or whatever. But they knew that the population was declining. They knew, and in there they even talked about, well, should we try to help get people the talent that they need to be able to succeed and stuff like that with our native population? And they said it would be the minorities. Okay. Instead, what they did is they decided to import everybody and just replace people, including your community, the inner city in that, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so that's what they've done. And so they've hung their hat on that. The problem is now if that immigration stops, and that's how you were getting your voters and your tax base, and then also the other side of that of their base is the LGBTQ movement.
Right.
And I'm not saying that to be facetious. I actually was in a meeting the other night that I recorded because they were recording as well. And it was a group of left individuals here in Minnesota that were talking to some House representatives who basically their goal was to keep all these teacher special interest stuff, the trans stuff, and then illegals. they didn't talk about American citizens other than that. They didn't talk about uh, people in your community. They didn't talk about, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so I'm just wondering, like, do they actually care? Because it's not seeming like it's seeming like they're pushing an agenda rather than actually caring about those individuals as well. Um, so just wanted to your thoughts on that, but just to show like how it sort of evolves up to where we're at now, you know.
I don't even know anymore because it's like a lot of people like to work with the problems because they feel like they can beat it, but instead they end up joining and looking the other way of the things that you're talking about. So a lot of this has been really bothersome to me because it's like everybody isn't what they say they are, and it's very, 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 very frustrating because
And
it's
then
you don't know who to trust anymore. You know,
I know
there's
you've talked about the wording with some of these things, like the thing that you did with your motion, whatever, and Red Wing declared a racism a public health crisis.
health crisis, right?
And some of those that then, or like the project for new Minnesota, new Americans, and all that jazz. When they say people of color, they don't necessarily mean black people, and they packages it as if they do. So it makes it sound like it's about you, and that if the GOP proposes it, that they don't like the black community, when maybe people are opposed at us bringing in. I think the one of the statistics I saw from the past 20 years is over 400,000 immigrants since the early 2000s. That's the
Right.
population of Minneapolis, basically. Um,
Right. And that'd be the crazy part is like if people don't pay attention to our like what I've gathered is that if people don't pay attention to what's going on in in their communities, because there's a lot of legislation and policies and ordinances that affect you. Um, and we don't want to realize that, you know, people they want to smoke weed, but they want to have their pistol too. Well, that's not how it works. You know what I'm saying? So it's like there's so many things that the black community, especially the poor community, we're not. A lot of people feel like they don't have time. They'd rather be screwed over and have to fight harder than fight smarter.
well, the GOP just doesn't show up, and that's
That
part of
too.
the problem.
That too.
Is that I've told them for the past 2 years, because part of how we met was uh, when I was working on Marvin's case in that,
Right.
right? I think that I think that you're one of the ones that got me in contact with Marvin, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but like I said, I was working on tenants' rights stuff first before that, and then I got
Right.
involved with Marvin's case. Um, is that oh, sorry, one second here.
No, you good.
Oh yeah. Is that well, okay? I'll let you go. Give me 1 second. I have to ask my son to quiet down just
No,
for.
you good. No, because it's that is what people don't realize. Like the streets do talk, and when you get to talk to other individuals, you start to realize that Minneapolis has a problem, and it's been a problem for a very long time because um, you have individuals in the community that will talk, but they only talk to certain people, um, and those certain people aren't in a position of power. They can help out to a certain degree, but they really can't. Nobody even listens to them because they feel like they're a conspiracy theorist, or um, we call out both sides because at the end of the day, it's like you have a sword, and one day you're talking to the Democrats. It's like the lesser of two evils, and why should it be like that?
What I've been trying to tell the GOP, because when I was working with the people up there and some of the groups, I worked with CUABP a little bit. Okay,
Right,
it was on specific issues because like certain things I agree with. Hey, we need a Brady list. Yes, we need cops not to get up on the stand and lie and then be able to be trusted again. To do another case where they're up there lying again. and
Right.
lying again. And some of these officers have. I mean, you can't withhold evidence from people. I'm a Constitution guy. Like, I don't care about your feelings. It's sort of like the
Right.
Constitution. And if you have a problem with that, well, then, you can go out the back way. I mean, don't let the door hit you.
And that's the problem is that, you can't call out both sides because that's one thing that I realized is that, when I first came into this, I didn't like the Republicans and the Republicans didn't like me. And I really kind of still don't like some of them. You know what I'm saying? Because they say one thing but do another. And it's gotten bothersome. So I was in my mind I was a Democrat. I was a liberal, progressive. But then along the way, I started to realize that I wasn't. You know what I'm saying? Wasn't a Republican either. I was a conservative, and I have conservative values, and that's how I was raised. Is to be a family man. Doesn't mean that I'm a Republican. You know what I'm saying? It's that I have morals and integrity that lean conservative. It's progressively conservative, urbanly. You know what I mean? And it's when you have conversations with Black Republicans who come from rural areas and don't know anything about urban areas, besides what they see on Chicago PD or Law and Order SVU, you know what I'm saying, or On the Wire or Oz, you know what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
like we don't deal with none of that because I hear a lot about Anton Lazaro. And what people don't want to talk about is the fact that he was Minnesota's Jeffrey Epstein. And there was a lot. That dude was putting up a
We've had
lot
more
of
than one.
money.
Oh, we've had more than one. Thorstad,
Right.
the whole Jordan sex abuse stuff. It's the Bill Clinton side of it. You can go down the list on that. I mean, it's been going on for quite a while on the child diddling stuff, and it needs to stop.
Well, yeah. And I mean, even throughout history, through time, it's always showed you that as long as you paid the right amount, they were willing to play. Because if people don't even remember Miami of the North, you know what I'm saying? They were dealing with the city council and the mayor was dealing with a cartel and want to act like they didn't know. Like, come on, man. Y'all can only be so naive for so long. It's the same thing in Red Wing when they talked about, we were doing an event called Wigger Days. Well, there was people calling that shit out, but instead of changing it, they wanted to shove it. They wanted to shove it under the rug, and it's like, no, we're not saying that. Hey, you did something bad, but when we know better, we can do better. You know what I'm saying? That's what is crazy to me. It's like even what's going on at the state capitol, right now is like there's a lot at play, and I didn't even realize that until today is when I was reading an article from Bill Glenn from the American Experiment, and he was saying because of the Supreme Court came back yesterday and said that 68 is a quorum, that nobody really was in power and that Steve Simon or whatever. But if they don't do anything by March 17th, there won't be anything done this year. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, how don't people honestly know what's going on? Because that really affects us. We can't even get that fraud committee going if they don't show up and do their work.
Their own base constituents, okay? Because you realize that these bills don't get passed. That means that these schools still have these unfunded mandates, okay? Right. And on top of that, now, hey, you know what? They're probably going to have to plan for some unaccompanied minors with the deportations happening. Because I know in one school district in southern Minnesota, 60% of them have one parent that is undocumented. Right. So you're going to have to deal with some of this stuff. Sorry. What happens if both parents are undocumented? All of a sudden you have a kid that they go home from school to no house. Right. These are things that are going to have to be thought of and either addressed, or you're going to end up with a whole bunch of kids shoved in a foster care system.
But the crazy part of it is, though, Robert, it's over 350,000 kids already like that. Already in America, that we have no idea where they're at. They're being, we just know that they're being trafficked. You know what I'm saying? And but they care about, that's the one thing that I'll never figure out about, today's times, is because there's the things that they cry about, it's already happening. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you're contradicting yourself, because you say you care, but if you really cared, then why aren't you stopping it or saying anything about the actions that are already going on? You know what I'm saying?
The churches make money off it. As far as like the Catholic charities and the Lutheran social services, those are the two of the biggest in Minnesota that have the money laundering scheme to set up everything for them when they come.
Right.
And so we need to stop that money laundering as well.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that we need to take care of Americans first. I mean, it doesn't seem like that should be that crazy. You can't go down to Mexico and demand the same, or Guatemala and demand the same treatment you get here because it's a different country, right? It's a different place.
So why are we wrong when we do it here? I don't get that. You know, Haiti was not Haiti, Dominican Republic. They deport. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like if you're an illegal, they deport you. So why can't we over here? Why can't we look out for Americans first? And I will never understand that, because the last couple of days on Facebook, man, it's been a joke. I've never seen so many black individuals talk about ICE. For real, it drives me crazy. It drives me wild, because it was like, y'all, everybody knew this was coming. Did not the words that were coming out of Buddy's mouth ring anything to y'all? Are y'all so used to being told something and them doing something different? That's the thing I think I really honestly believe, is that they were told one thing, they didn't believe him, but he's doing what he was saying. He was going to deport people. He was going to do this. He was going to do that. And he's actually doing it.
If he doesn't, you're going to have another Holocaust, okay? And this time it's going to be real. It's not going to be just people that were in detention camps and whatever else. And I'm just saying, like, if you look at history, the numbers don't add up on certain things. And if people call it a conspiracy, all I'm saying is, like, you want it to be real. You want 6 million to really die. Keep doing what you're doing.
But that's the whole thing of it is, though,
far that they can only take so much. They're going to push back. And once that transition happens from normal people not being extreme to them being extreme because of what they've been exposed to, you're not going to like the result. You know, like, there's a reason why we use Marines the way we do, but they don't come back whole, a lot of them. Okay, it changes you when well, you know, from the streets, right? Like, once you've killed somebody, it sort of changes you, especially.
It does.
Once
you rob somebody, I ain't never killed nobody, so I can't speak from that experience. But I know of busting a gun, it makes you feel invincible. It makes you feel, even like selling drugs, it makes you feel like you're on top of the world. Like, money just it buys you everything. You know what I'm saying? And people don't realize that is the bigger you get, the more problems you definitely have. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, I'm sure you've seen in your experience, though, that people that, like, once they start down that road, right? Like, once you've done your first kill, after that, then, like, it seems to be really easier. The line goes easier and easier, down to just not caring about human life. And that's what war does to people. If you haven't looked at the history of psychological warfare in war afterwards, like how these vets actually had what they had to deal with, and sometimes they're put in situations where, you know, like in Afghanistan or Iraq, where these kids would come up to them and pull a pin on a grenade, you know.
Well, that's what makes me think about when it comes about policing.
What's that?
And that's what makes me think about when it comes to policing, because if police get away with so much bullshit, you know, we only really scrutinize them when they're killing niggas, but we don't realize of all the we can read a news story anytime, any day about police brutality when they're beating up people, when they're sexually abusing people. It's not just police killing people. You know what I'm saying? There's so many other things of that, but it builds up to a killing, you know, because we allow certain moves or ninja training or MRT.
Well, what have they been exposed to?
Ketamine.
You know, I mean, what have they been exposed to too? I mean,
right. Well, that too.
because how
Well,
we got
yeah, I
Robert
mean,
Cole was one of the first times he was responding to a scene when he was a rookie. Within his first year or two, he had his partner literally beaten in a coma, pretty much with a pipe, and he got beaten pretty well with it too.
right,
Um,
right.
and so they were just trying to respond to a DV call. Okay, so if that's your first experience, and then every single experience after that is not positive, at some point you're going to get jaded.
Right.
Just like if you have only bad experiences with white people, what are you going to think about?
Well, even that's the one thing of like my grandpa said, growing up is that he didn't know he didn't meet any black person until he went to the army, right? And people always ask me like, what do I have against the army? Well, when you have somebody that was there and they tell you that, listen, I know you want to do well, because I wanted to go to the army. I wanted to be a part of that, make America great again crowd, what I'm saying, back to blue. But my grandpa he told me like the army is no place for a black man. Military, it's great to want to stand for America, but why would you want to go stand for America when America has never stood for you? And I was like, damn, you a white man saying this. And my grandpa was so deep, I never really understood the conversations that we were having, because until now, and I see it, is that, people complain about never getting loans for FAFSA and I should, paying back loans. Well, first of all, I never was given that opportunity because I never signed up for selective service. So anytime that I had to realize right away is that I didn't qualify for FAFSA. If I was going to go to college, it either had to come out of my own money or it had to be a scholarship. And that was my choice. And people don't realize is that we all make choices, whether it's about morals and integrity and what you stand on, because we all have that consequences and repercussions along the line. Just like I'm dealing with something from high school. I'm almost 50. My whole adult life, I've been labeled. Not only labeled as a black man, not only labeled as a felon, but something that I'll be labeled for the whole rest of my adult life, till I die.
I understand that. And like I did 10 years in the military. I went in because I thought it was a good thing.
Right.
And to find out while I was in, oh no, there's a lot of corruption too. And by the way, we're not doing what we got told we were doing. And oh, by the way, it's all for corporations and drugs and whatever else. And
right,
that's sort of what the truth is. Iran Contra never stopped. Our government's still doing it.
no,
They're still selling drugs.
and that's the one thing that it made
exactly
me
what's going on.
realize is that what happened on May 25th, 2020, and then seeing the way our politics has gone, because every election cycle since then, we've always had some drama about residency. And it's like, how can you believe people that can't even tell the truth to at the will of the people? They have to lie and steal to get ahead. And
when they wanted to use that and
right,
push it.
and
they didn't care about Floyd. I mean, they didn't care about the person. Okay, what they cared about is it was a situation that they could use to push their One Minnesota program that had failed in 2019. And oh, by the way, we're going to just push this as far as we can to get as much as we can while we can, and to screw everybody in between.
Well, and that's like the whole thing too of even, people are asking me, I know there's this guy running for mayor. His name is Jazz Hampton. And nobody in the black community knows this guy. I know he was a lawyer with Turn Signal, and he was a part of the Marvin Haynes case. But that's what basically he was known for.
Jazz. Okay, I know who Jazz
Hampton,
is.
Right. And so I was like, I never heard of the guy. I don't know who he is.
I think he was Andrew Marquardt's assistant, truthfully.
So, damn, that's what he was.
Because he had a gal that was there, and then he had Jazz. Now that you say that, it makes
Right.
sense.
So he's running for mayor, and I couldn't find anybody black that really. I mean, honestly, if people wanted to stand up for this dude, and now I can see why some of the Haynes were sharing it because he was on that case and getting Marvin free. But it's like, damn, if they see
You just need somebody that's going to be.
who dude is connected to, like RT Ryback and the Minneapolis Foundation, oh man, they would totally opposite think wrong of this guy. And it's like,
So be careful of what you wish for.
right,
Yeah, because like what we need somebody that's not armed
right,
with a brain. Okay, I'm not saying I'm not expecting perfection. I'm not expecting excellent. I am expecting a little bit of common damn sense.
right,
That is it. Common sense. You can't spend more than you
right.
make. Okay, before you have money for a cool parade, you should probably make sure that that street has potholes that are filled. I mean, these are not
Right.
hard things, you know. Water and sewer need to be taken care of before.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole side of North Minneapolis that doesn't have high-speed internet. They have more shot spotters than there is high-speed Wi-Fi. But we say we care about the kids. We say we care about education. You know, we say we care about the next generation, but they make it so much harder for us to be better, to be who we really want to be.
So I have a question for you. How do you get the screen sharing back up after you accidentally lost
Okay,
it
so
on
if
this
you
thing?
go to, there's a screen share button. So there's the mute button, there is the disable camera, and then right there in the middle, you'll see the share screen.
Your front camera. Here we go. Add people.
There isn't no share screen?
No, it's just I do a video. Sorry, I thought I'd ask because I know you
You know
use
I
this
do.
platform as well.
It's on, and I can share the screen on here, it says, but
Oh, okay. If you can pull up the lady yelling at Walter, that'd be
oh
cool.
yeah, the lady.
That's all I was gonna do. When I lost the screen sharing, that's all I was gonna do for another video
Oh,
for
right. Now I
today.
can pull that up.
And I'll only go for another about 10, 15 minutes after that, and then we'll be done for today. We're gonna try to be on. I'm gonna try to be on at least once a week, possibly once every other week.
You know what? I think I can get that on his YouTube. Because he did have, I
it's on
seen
his
that earlier. It was
YouTube.
on his YouTube.
If you Google Amber Mose
Yeah.
or whatever her name is, then she's not connected to Facebook. It says the group that she's a part of claimed she doesn't represent us, but then she tagged him in
Right.
it.
Yeah, I thought that was
And
crazy.
she's a representative. Yeah, and then she's the representative that spoke at the
Right.
House.
Oh yeah, no, they
for
put her on. I shouldn't say her, but they put call
whatever you want to
the
call them. I'm
person.
sorry. Like
no, because that's what's crazy is that people have been saying of like, okay, is it a woman? Is it a man? And it was like, so here's 8 hours ago. Hold on, I gotta share my screen.
Inch of your face and is screaming obscenities in your face. He was hoping you'd knee-jerk react, slap it out of his hand, do something crazy.
Whose house is this? Whose house is this? You chicken meatball-headed motherfucker. Whose house is this? Whose house is this?
Well, either that or have the law enforcement that were present try to physically remove them from the room. I mean, he repeatedly said over and over and over again, drag me out, drag me out.
It'll go on the news.
450 pounds.
Yeah, kick me out. It'll be on every fucking news organization in the country. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. I'm done with it. Get your good glamour shots there, motherfucker.
That was obviously their goal. I mean, they're stupid enough to tell you what their objective was.
Why drag me out? Drag me out. I'm not moving. When do we want it? We're 150 pounds, motherfucker. I hope y'all are strong. Drag me out? Have fun explaining it to all the local news orgs. I know you get to speak your mind.
But a megaphone 2 inches from another man's face screaming obscenities? When did we get to a point the state troopers get you out of there?
Well, you actually don't get to speak your mind. As an elected state representative, I can't just stand up at my desk on the House floor and say whatever I want, whenever I want. We have rules and procedures for who gets to speak when and under what circumstances. If those rules apply to me as an elected official who actually gets to vote on the law, they certainly apply to everyone else. We have very strict rules regarding the conduct of people who come to visit us in the people's house. This idea that it's a public place, it's the house of the people, therefore I can just do whatever I want, is categorically wrong. It is a crime under Minnesota Statute 3.151 to disrupt the legislature.
Then let me ask you this. Why did nothing happen? Why did they not finally escort this huge man out of the house and say, you know, thank you, you got your message across, get out of here? Why did that not happen?
It did happen. It happened after the cameras were off and after we evacuated the room.
But then they kind of win. That person now says, hey, we do this another. Okay, tell me how. Because they
don't win. They don't win at all, because their stated objective was to provoke a violent confrontation. They wanted the video image to put on television outlets across the nation of police swarming this 450-pound assailant. That's what they wanted. And they didn't get that. They also wanted to stop the GOP. We came back to work within 30 minutes, concluded our hearing, did everything we set out to do. They failed on both fronts. This was a total failure on their part. And then I turned around and exposed the fact that they did this, who sent them, the fact that it was instigated by one of the absent Democrat House members, Lee Finke. And by the way, within hours of this occurring, Representative Lucy Ream, another Democrat, turned around and incited another gathering that's scheduled for January 27th. So this might just be part one of two.
But because 14 million people shared this bad boy on X, Jesse Waters put it out there.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back for doing the obvious, but I knew right away, as soon as this started, I knew how important it was to whip out my phone and start recording. And indeed, we would not have gotten the full up-close image of the vile behavior that was taking place in that committee hearing if I had not done that. And it's interesting to me, like the news cycle on this. So that night, Tuesday night, this is obviously a newsworthy story, right? Like you can't make the argument that it's not newsworthy.
No.
So the night that it happens, Alpha News grabs hold of it. They immediately do a piece. They link to the video. Everybody can see what happened. And it's just the facts, man. Here's what happened, right? In the context. The next day, I started to get media inquiries. Minnesota Reformer did a piece, WCCO did a spot, and then there was the Jesse Waters thing. In the case of the Reformer and CCO, the local outlets, their pieces were very much couched in he said, she said. Well, here's what the Representative Hudson thinks about what happened to him last night. Here's what Melissa Hortman has to say about what happened. So it's this game of trying to portray, trying to go down the middle and get perspectives from both sides. It's like, no, just report the facts of what happened. A Democrat sent a mob, an absent Democrat who's not showing up to work, sent a mob into a committee hearing where, by the way, that Representative Lee Finke was supposed to be.
And address the elephant in the room. And I do mean literally, because it's only the elephants that are in the room. And we've discovered over the course of the past 24 hours, which was the last time we were here in this room holding this committee for public safety, that one of the members of the absentee caucus.
And I'm telling you, you will definitely see deposits. You will definitely get checks.
I was skeptical in the beginning too, but
that would be sitting in this room with us if they decided to come to work, participated in instigating the incident that many of us were here to witness yesterday. An incident where I was sitting in that chair over there, not but 2-3 feet away from folks who were escalating. One of whom was holding a bullhorn. And by the way, I saw the moment that the hand went into the purse. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who had eyes on. We do have a room full of law enforcement professionals. And that moment of what is coming out of that purse, that applies to this situation right here. Being in the midst of aggression and escalation and the uncertainty of what somebody who's 2 feet away from you yelling in your face is about to do, that is directly applicable to what we're talking about here. Ultimately, the way that situation was resolved, which resulted in the total failure of the assailants themselves and their stated objectives of provoking a violent confrontation and or halting us from being able to conduct our business, is we all had to leave. We had to clear the room. We had to retreat in order for law enforcement to be able to do their job and clear the room and get us back into business, which we did, and we completed our business. The irony of the fact that this very circumstance took place here yesterday and that it was instigated by somebody who should be in this room.
The audacity of this, of you don't show up to work, but you send your friends, your goons, to come into our hearing room and threaten us? And it is a threat. A 450-pound person hovering over you with a bullhorn is a threatening posture.
With the language you're after, there's no way that's not. A little sad that 66 of your compadres are not at work, and not a one of them is enough time to declare this a terrible thing. To come out and speak against it, I'd find that remarkable as well.
Well, Melissa Hortman put out some boilerplate condemnation and couched it in very soft language about this just isn't really an effective way to make sure you're heard
that's
by
what I mean.
legislators. Which, come on, no, this is an attack upon your colleagues that one of your own caucus instigated.
Yeah, no,
I would
that's
expect much stronger language than that.
Wow.
Can you stop sharing on your end, or do I need to do it on mine? Here we go. Yeah.
Wow.
So again, I'm a pretty middle of the road guy, but that's obviously unacceptable. You can't have people doing that. And for those that are just listening, because I know that Jerry is DJB Lethal is streaming this as well. There was a very large trans male that had or trans female that had a shirt on that said "Trans Menace" on it.
Right.
And so this person obviously was wanting to be a menace because they had a shirt on that said that. So I mean, I'm not assuming there. As much as I have problems with both sides, that's unacceptable, you know. And the thing of it is they have the group for this coming Monday. Indivisible is the one putting
Indivisible will be there.
Okay.
Right.
And that's the group that I actually went to their online meeting the other day. And it's interesting because they also work with the Aliveness Project. So they're they're tied together, these people. It gets interesting because Indivisible hasn't registered with the state to do business, yet they have their 990s. So they have their nonprofit. They just haven't registered with the state. So I don't know how you register with the IRS, but not the state. But they didn't. And this is a common theme that we've seen amongst a lot of these organizations. They fail to register a lot. They just sort of exist in the imagination or whatever. I mean, because they're probably using the national tax ID number or whatever. But the thing with it is, though, is they're getting money locally and they're acting locally here within the state, and they're conducting the business within the state, and they're conducting the business of influencing our legislators. So I'm pretty sure they should, I don't know, maybe register.
Right.
You know, doesn't seem like it's too crazy on that.
That's wild.
The only other thing that I have for tonight is, and we'll go through more next week, more about the history of the Humphrey School, more about the history of communism in Minnesota, and then the power play again between the different groups. Because also the mob was involved with some of these people, and you go down the list, and some big business too. And so it just gets interesting. But so they had a ruling the other day and the GOP did not. It's not my place to say whether or not they should have listened to the arguments I gave them, but they didn't, and I don't have a problem with that. But they also didn't succeed at what they were trying to do, because in the court they ended up getting sued by Hortman and Steve Simon, because there was about a quorum, right? It's all this thing about numbers and whatever,
Right.
because they're evenly split, but they're not, but they are, but they're not. So they brought it up to the Supreme Court. So we have half of our legislatures, 66 DFL members, that failed to show up to be sworn in and present their election certificates as required by law. Now, outside of that, sometimes they do allow you to swear in, like if your dad is a judge or whatever, and you want to go do it with your dad. But you have to come and request permission. It has to be a special circumstance. You can't just go hide in a closet and have the janitor administer the oath, right? And so Steve Simon, on the day that he had the GOP meet, the only thing he had the authority to do, gavel it open. There's not a quorum. Gavel it shut, or require the sergeant at arms to compel attendance. Okay. He conducted business. In fact, he conducted the business of presenting the certificates for absent members. He was acting on their behalf. The presentation of those can only, you'd have to have a quorum to conduct business. So how were they presenting them without a quorum? The GOP people were there, but the statute 3.05 or whatever for their administrative stuff for that says you shall show up. It's not an option. If the court tells you shall do something rather than you should, or if the law you shall rather than should, it's non-negotiable. You have to do it. So they shall show up and they shall present their certificates. Steve Simon's not the individual that got elected. So how is he acting on their behalf? They failed to argue that whatsoever. And they failed to argue that his job duties were only ceremonial, as obviously showing up was ceremonial, right? They decided not to show up and do their ceremony separate, and they're the ones that said it was just ceremonial. So you can't Steve Simon. I almost said Steve Harvey. Steve Simon can't be. He can't have any harm done to him if, in fact, it was only ceremonial. There's no harm done to him. You know what I mean? And the second part of that is they're not. The DFL is nothing right now. They're not house members.
They ain't shit. Right.
Because to be a house member, you have to go to the house, present your certificate, and be sworn in. There's no harm because they're nothing. They haven't accepted their seat. It's like having a job offer. If you get a job offer and you never show up for the job, do you have a job? But somehow the DFL thinks that they did not show up for a job after being offered a job. By the way, get paid in between. And
I want to show something real quick about shall versus the difference between shall and should. Because that does matter, because see, shall is a model verb that is used in the future tense. The word should is the past form of the verb shall and is also used as a model verb. It is used to express, this is should, as it is used to express conditionality, advice, obligation, duty, or correctness. Now, shall, it should be used to express certainty, instruction, command, or obligation. See, so there is a difference. So you should come tomorrow. That doesn't mean that you have to, right? It comes down to a choice, but you shall, it's more of a command. It's more of an obligation, but should is a duty or correctness. And honestly, it all comes down to how you interpret And that's what I believe is like the big hang up in Minnesota right now is all about, like I said, interpretation, because depending on how you read depends on your political views. And that's what people really don't want to talk about. They say that the court that read those, in my eyes, is reading the Mason's Book of Law, and for legislators and things like that, they have all these statutes and these guidelines they got to go by. But it all matters of how you read it, how you're programmed, you're indoctrinated. And if you're indoctrinated to believe and think a certain way, then that's the way that no matter how it's written, you're always going to see different than somebody that was geared or programmed or indoctrinated to think than
There's a
somebody else.
problem though with our laws, with having it open to too much interpretation, because you
Right.
have to be able to understand the laws. And like when I was in the Navy, I had to do regulatory compliance, so like I had to figure out what the laws were that we had to comply with for whatever we were doing, and it varied. Sometimes it was international law. Okay, like when
Right.
we were shipping patients back from the Middle East, there may be something simple to get care back in the U.S. You had multiple different jurisdictions they went through. And so you had to follow the laws for each one of those in order to get them back here safely. And that's one of the things that is very common, though, is the wording like that, shall and should. Okay, like one is the person's going to die probably if you don't do it, or they're not going to accept your patient at all. And the other one is, yeah, we like it, but if you don't, it's up to you.
That's like, here's the thing of even like versus that shall versus should is like Jody talked about at the when they had talked about fraud the other day at state capitol was you should expect fraud. Well, you know what I'm saying? So they already in their minds they should.
There shall be fraud.
Right. You know what I'm saying? Right. You know what I'm saying? So it's like if you use these words right back to their ass. And that's the one, but a lot of people don't understand that is that if you just like with the no knock warrants, it was you couldn't do no knocks, but only with the exceptions, right? So it's not actually prohibited, but with the exceptions. And that's the one crazy part is like there's no disrespect to anybody in Minnesota. It's let's stop lying to the people. Let's be real. And that's the one thing that I ask people, right? Is I see so many individuals in Minneapolis or Minnesota that, want to work with individuals. And it makes me wonder, you want to work with somebody so bad that you'll work with evil. No matter the history that they have in their past. You know what I'm saying? Because there's a lot of histories in Minneapolis. And a lot of those haven't changed. Only thing that's changed is their titles. Not their behaviors, their titles. You know what I'm saying? So it's people have to be awake and understand is that everything that's good is not really good for us. And just be transparent, because I'll tell you like this, no matter if it's the good, the bad, or the ugly, all I want is the truth. I don't want to be covered up just to be feeling good, and then we still got to deal with the same thing tomorrow because all you did was put a Band-Aid on this shit. That's why I feel like my resolution was a Band-Aid.
Well, in Minnesota here, they play both sides. Okay, like the DFL will be conservative when they need to win elections, and then they'll go to the opposite side when they need to. But there's an overall agenda that they have underneath it all. Okay, in the 90s was a very good example with that James Trudeau of the County Attorneys Association, the one that took over from Kathleen Morris of the from the Jordan child sex abuse stuff. Okay, he was in charge of. James Trudeau then was in charge of the County Attorneys Association. He was pushing the tough on crime stuff before it got pushed nationally. We're talking like 88. Okay, and knowing though that the government was bringing in the drugs. In fact, we had Adnan Kagashi, one of the biggest drug dealers of Iran-Contra, here in Minnesota looking at an ethanol plant. And we had Robert Maxwell, who bought out one of the farmers' magazines from up here and was doing a university center with Gorbachev as well. So yeah, we were going to be bringing the commies over here and actually giving them a center with the EU. So it is what it is. But I mean that didn't go through because Maxwell ended up belly up. But then so it went from that to Sharif Willis talking about on record about the government bringing in the drugs and weapons. And oh, by the way, around this time also was coming out that all the Indian casinos were involved with money laundering for the mob.
Right.
And this was all on record. I mean, Trump testified about it. And in there, the Sabes family, literally, it's on record, the Lucchese crime family they were connected to. Well, then we have the newspaper articles from around the time, and this says the Gambino crime family. Well, come to find out, the FBI has files on these groups, and they were also involved with La Cosa Nostra. And so, there's something there. So they had to cover it up. So what they do, I'm not sure who killed Hoff, but I know sure as hell it wasn't those guys, the kids that they blamed, Pepe and those kids.
And the truth does rot the brain.
There was this cop that got shot at this pizza shack, and it was a hit style. I mean, up close, right there. The kids that they caught for it didn't match any of the descriptions, clothed or otherwise. The shoe prints didn't match. The witnesses couldn't even ID them when they drove the kids by. Yet Keith Ellison and Jerry McAfee went and got the reward money for framing these kids. And they used that on a national level to push the tough on crime legislation in Biden's crime bills. They literally had Hoff's name on some of the stuff.
Right.
And it was like, okay, there's some of the stuff that the anti-racist action people were saying about that made sense because they were telling the truth about what was actually going on. They took these kids down for rides down to the river where they beat the hell out of them to the point where they pissed themselves and they had to walk home. And these were just kids in the community to try to get information to figure out who did it. It was on record that they beat a Native American guy and left him in the back of a cop car in the trunk or whatever. And the thing that the newspaper said is you sort of got to let them blow off steam. They were okay with it. It was a normal thing. And then went from that into murder to Rapolis, right? Shortly thereafter. And so if people don't think that happens, well, I'm going to tell you that, you should probably go buy some oceanfront property in Arizona. Because it is what it is, my grandpa was a cop. Okay. I ended up finding out he was on the payroll of the Smaldone family. He's the one that taught me about what a drop gun was. Okay. So these things happen. To say that they don't is asinine. Does all cops do it? No. I'm not saying all cops do, but we don't need cops beating the hell out of people and making them piss themselves and they didn't do anything wrong. That's just probably not right either. But off of that.
And that's one thing that made me realize too, is that once you take back, you look at it from a different aspect of like, just take the racism out, right? Just take that narrative that it's black versus white and just take that out. Is it morally, ethically, criminally, right or wrong? You know what I'm saying? And you get past, oh, he just did it because he's racist and blah, blah, blah. No, that's vague as fuck. You know what I'm saying? And unless you explain, just like with George Floyd, that's the crazy. I don't know what the hell that means.
It's a monorail. It's like what they used to have at the zoo, that the little tram that used to go around. So I said sell a motion from property in Arizona. So he said sell them a monorail like the zoo did. Right.
That's true. That's true. They did. I forget about that one at the Minnesota Zoo. That's not there no more, I don't think. The monorail.
Yeah, it cost us lots of money and it wasn't there for that long. But yeah.
Right.
You're 100% right. And like, so Karen Knutson was one of the ones involved with that rag that was telling some good stuff. But that's the guy that Keith Ellison was defending on a different charge, because the guy was was a violent communist. Okay, like he'd beat people up and stuff like that. And so that's where Ellison got involved with them. So Ellison obviously knew these kids were innocent too. So this is all one big frame job, and they've kept it going ever since. So don't think that they're going to frame more people for money and to push a narrative and to have social whatever on either side. They did it with, I mean, a lot of the different killings up here. There's been issues with the police stuff. With Miss Potter not knowing the difference between a taser and a firearm. You go down the list, and it is what it is. Oh, so you're asking a question: how far back does communism go? Well, so socialism goes back to the Industrial Revolution. That's where we also got capitalism from. Okay, yeah, it's
Right. Basically, just another ism.
Okay. But the
We talk
communism,
about that all the time, and I think people need to be better informed, and just don't know racism, no communism, no socialism, no ageism, no ableism, no colorism, no all the isms, because there's a lot of them. And once you realize is that it's not just racism, we have systemic policies and legislation, but those are things we can work on. But let's work on all the other isms, because that's what's really dividing individuals, and they don't even see it, is because we're all told that the Willie Lynch letter is the syndrome is not real. It's the letter is not real. Well, but when you read that letter, how can you look into our communities? How is that? That's like I'm like reading it, like what the fuck's wrong with my community? So how is it not real?
Yeah, so communism got its big start late 1800s, early 1900s, and that was pushing the socialist stuff to the violent point. Okay, I'm just going to say it like that, to the violent point, because there's a balance between socialism and capitalism, because every government's going to provide some sort of service or benefit to the public and ask for something in return. And we've never had a truly capitalist society, because it's always, as far as free market goes, because the free markets have been taken over by big business right at the beginning, and they've always set themselves up to where no one can compete, and they buy out the small guys, and you go down the list. We haven't had a true free market. Marx and Engels. Marx is so Marx. He had a rabbi that he had as a kid that was pretty socialist too. Socialism also had a lot to do with the French Revolution. So both Marx and then the Zionism were also a response to the Dreyfus affair over in France. Dreyfus was a military officer who supposedly it was false. I'm not sure if it is. I haven't dug that much into it. Was been falsely accused of something. Anyway, people got pushed back against the Jews for some stuff, but because of that, because he was a Jew, but they had also been pushing socialism in France, and it was mainly them, and so people did not liking the socialism and equated the two together because, well, they were the ones pushing it.
Damn.
So, Zionists say that we need our own state in order for the Jewish people to be safe, and that was his goal by any means necessary, and he achieved it within the 50 years that he said he wouldn't, and that was Herzl. And then you had Marx on the other side, which was we have to destroy all societies and basically have a religionless, moralist society, and then everything's okay. As far as you're asking in America, well, since the beginning, I mean, we brought them all over here. Okay, after the in the 1800s, so right after the Civil War, with this influx of Eastern European immigrants who brought that with them when they came over here. And they got, so Franz Boas was a socialist, and he was involved with the founding of the NAACP. He thought that the real race problem was that we needed to make black people more white to the point where they get accepted. So they don't get to have their own culture. But that's awkward. But then NAACP was founded on that. So, and then you have people like that too. So what they did is they just got in bed with TONA 1810. I'm not sure what that is. So I will look it up and then I'll get back on that. But well, so there are some Unitarian type movements that have been around for a bit, but as far as like the big push was after the Civil War, and because we're talking about millions of people came over, and they were opening up the West. But that's all the Civil War was over, is opening up the West, and nobody wanted to go West. So then you had to have a war to make people want to go West, and there we go. There's some monetary policy and other stuff behind it too. I wish I could say it was about slavery, but you actually look at it. There's so many other policies, and it was just another thing with that.
It was part of it.
There were people that were against slavery. I will say that, but as far as overall big picture, when you're looking at
it wasn't it wasn't right. It wasn't a priority. You know what I'm saying? It was just one of the things that led up to. It was one of the small, I guess, problems that America faced with white people, and not one of the major ones. I don't know what that is, but I'm gonna hit it though. It's 1776. He said he whatever that means. Probably laughed.
Oh, the organic constitution and that. Oh yeah, we've gone into some of that, and we'll go into some of that more on future episodes. I'm trying to focus on some stuff here in Minnesota that we went through today of the communism in Minnesota, how it influenced the U of M, how it influenced public affairs, how it influenced urban planning. Because as I showed the video in the beginning, there was the socialist was the guy that Gruen was the guy who gave us malls, indoor malls, and you go down the list. Didn't work out that well. It ended up being a very capitalist venture, but there's just a lot more to history. And here in Minnesota, the Communist Party's been very active and very involved, and they've gone so far and pushing things so far, if they're not pushed back against, you're going to end up having the rise of the extreme right that will be violent because people aren't able to afford it anymore. And there will be violence on both sides. You know, and I prefer, I'm a Constitution guy. I like the Constitution as far as like, I know there's issues with the Constitution we have and that. Okay, but as far as the protections and rights in there that are alleged, those are pretty good. And I think that most people would agree with that. And I think that everybody deserves those rights. Whether or not it's played out the way that it's in the Constitution is a totally different story for another day. But we've gone through then the influence that it's had up here, a couple of the historical events here in Minnesota. And then, yeah, so I'm probably going to land it here within the next few minutes.
Good. I said, I just asked dude put that link in there. I want to read it. I can't hit the link and see it. So
it's the Organic Act. Yeah. So I'll definitely get you the link, Chaz, and then we'll definitely throw that up some other time, probably next week. I'll recap with a couple of the comments, and then we can go from there. Oh, the bar intrusion.
Right.
With the courts. Yeah. So we still under maritime law. Yeah. So basically our entire system is all a facade. It's all a corporation, and we're just pieces of paper that they own us. That's what your birth certificate is. We'll explain more of that later. I'm not trying to get people too far off.
We'll be here all night.
Yeah. So Titles of Nobility Act. Okay. Well, we still have titles of nobility though. Your officers have letters of marque, and your judges and have immunity, and everybody that has any sort of immunity has a title. And you know, thank you so much for everybody.
He going way back. You can't be going back that far on people. They don't know that shit. Because we have individuals today that don't even realize the treaties that before America was America. You know what I'm saying? So we made treaties with the Native Americans to be what America is today that we don't even stand on today. So that's just what I want to say, is that we don't even stand on treaties that most people don't even know what the hell we're talking about. So I'll say that I deal with that every day, is that people don't understand is that before you were born, there was a whole bunch of people that were living, making laws and making legislation that we need to eradicate, repel, rewrite, whatever you want to call it. But that's that, and I'll land my plane there. But we definitely got to come together as people and unite.
Oh, definitely. We'll get more into the history side of it with what Sam's talking about in another episode. But for today, we're trying to focus on Minnesota for a very specific reason, is because this needs to be confronted, and it needs to be exposed, the communist influence that's going on. And we can't have people doing that to our legislators. It's not cool. So thank you guys very much for everything. I really appreciate it, and have a good night, y'all.